it's 1 o'clock. Welcome to this panel on sacralizing the nation. My name is Sam Vermeers, and I am what I think is the accidental chair of this panel. In contrast to other panel chairs, I didn't do anything. So I didn't prepare. I was assigned to chair this panel, and I said I'm very happy to do it. But I'm not responsible at all for the content, so I take no blame, and I take no credit either. And I think it's going to be more credit because we have three luminaries of the field who will be presenting. So I think I just can sit back and relax and enjoy. So I'm just going to very briefly introduce the speakers. But really, if you do not know who Don Baker is, you shouldn't be here. He has been at UBC for as long as I can remember, which is more than 30 years in the field, actually. He said he will retire this year. I'm not sure if I can believe him, but we'll see. And of course, he has worked mainly on the Catholic tradition in Korea, but apart from that, also very widely in many aspects of Korean religions, especially Korean new religions. He has many very interesting publications. Then we have Liora Sarfati from the University of Tel Aviv, and who got her PhD in Indiana. Who is a specialist in field of shamanism, various aspects of shamanist tradition in Korea. And finally, we have Jun An from the University of Michigan, who is closer to my field, so Korean Buddhism, although he originally, I think, wrote his dissertation on Japanese Buddhism, but he's now working mainly in the field of Koryo Buddhism. And then finally, to round things up, our very own Professor Song Hae-young from the Department of Religious Studies at SNU will give his discussant's comments. And Professor Song's field is Chonggyo Simnihak, which I guess is psychology of religion, or religious psychology, something like that. That's maybe the field I'm least familiar with. So, Professor Baker, please.
My name is Don Baker, and I have a new booklet coming out on Korean new religions soon. I call it a booklet from Cambridge University Press has something called the Element Series. They limited me to 85 pages, all Korean new religions. It should be coming out this fall. But today I won't talk about all 85 pages. I'll talk about the nationalistic elements of some Korean new religions. And there are many new religions in Korea, most of them quite small. We're not really sure the exact number because they kind of go in and out of existence. But new religions, of course, are controversial. I'm not going to dismiss new religions as simply nationalism. They are religions and nationalistic. They are real religions. I don't want to call them a cult like some people do, or pseudo-religion like the Japanese did. Let me go to the first slide here. Let's see. Korea's new religions, it's not unusual for a religion to have a sacred place, right? For Christians, and for Muslims also, Jerusalem is a sacred place. And Muslims have also Mecca. But Korean new religions make Korea a sacred place. But what's interesting is they make it a sacred place, not just in the past, but many of them make it a sacred place in the future as well, which is kind of different. And that's why I call it a form of religious nationalism. And we'll begin with the oldest of Korea's new religions, which is Cheondokyo now, used to be called Donghak. Let's see, okay. Okay. Can you see me when I block the screen? There we go. Okay. So, now, Donghak is often portrayed as a nationalistic religion because of the Donghak Rebellion, right? But if you actually see what Che Jae-yu was saying, he didn't say Chosunhak, he said Donghak, Eastern religion. That didn't mean the eastern part of East Asia. When he was asked if his religion was different from Sahak, Western religion, he said, I was born in the East and received these teachings in the East. He says, the land is divided east and west. How can the west be called east? Confucius was born in the state of Lu. So he's not he's identifying with East Asia when he says Tonghak. He's not identifying with Korea per se as Eastern. We do see some proto-nationalistic ideas in Che-Jae-yu. In his writings, he calls the Japanese dog-like beings. And he's also very angry at the Manchu. I mean, 2.5 centuries later, after the Manchu invasion, still mad at them. I would call him kind of proto-nationalism. He did pick up an idea that's picked up by many of the new religions. Let me see. I keep forgetting to do this, don't I? Okay. Poguk Anmin is used by a lot of the new religions. We would now translate that as support the nation and stabilize the people. I would think with Che-Jae-yu, Guk means more regime than nation. He doesn't have the modern concept of a nation yet, I would argue, but it became that way in many of the new religions. And again, his animosity against the Manchu and so on. Also, what's important, he introduced a new meaning of kebyuk. I mean, kebyuk was an old term that meant the creation of the material world, but he introduced the idea that it means the recreation of the world in which we live. And of course, where is kebyuk going to begin? On the Korean Peninsula. He doesn't make that explicit. It becomes explicit in later new religions. So the world is going to be transformed into a much better place starting in Korea. And many of my students who like K-pop would agree. Okay? So everybody knows about Tonghak and Cheondokyo. How many people know about the Cheongyuk, the corrected Book of Changes? Okay. Koreanizing the changes. A guy named Kang Hong. Of course, the Juyuk, Koreans call it, right? The changes of Zhou dynasty is well known. But a guy named Kang Hong, who's he died in 1884. So he decided that the Book of Changes is after all about change, right? And so the world is always changing, and the Book of Changes shows China is kind of the center of those changes. But he argues that a new change is coming. And in the new change, Korea will be the center of the changes, okay, instead of China. Okay, so he's much more Korea-centric than Che-Jae-yu was. Okay, and I'll show you the 3 charts he was working with. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. Too small, aren't they? Kind of hard to read them. This is the original 8 trigrams. And then you have one totally by King Wen of ancient China. And then on my right, your left, it's kind of small there, is the one by Kang Hong. And what he's done, Korea is, let me show without touching. This is Korea. He's made Korea much closer to full yang. And of course, the changes occur in a clockwise direction. So the world is moving in a Korean direction. That's his point. Okay. By the way, he came to this vision when he was dancing and stomping his feet and chanting. So some of his followers formed a stamping and dancing religion. Okay, and so of course he's also talking about a kebyuk will come. You know, there'll be a massive transformation of the universe in which we live, and again it'll begin, and Korea will be the center now, with the new Book of Changes. In the new world, it's going to be much nicer than, it won't be hot like today, okay? It would be like fall all year round. There'll only be 360 days a year, and each one will be perfect, no difference in when the sun rises and when it sets, because the world will be straight on its axis. It won't be leaning one way or the other. And everybody would get along, which would be nice, wouldn't it? So this is basically kebyuk. So again, Korea will pioneer these changes. Will be he says the Book of Changes tells us that Korea will be where this change happens, that will benefit all of humanity. So the idea in these new religions is that soon that Korea will be the place for all humanity to look for spiritual guidance, is the idea. How many people here have heard of Gangjung Yudo? Very small group, Reformed Confucianism. They have a little village up in Hadong. I've been there. They also believe this is coming, a great transformation, and they say the whole world will soon adopt Confucian ethics from Korea, not from China, but from Korea. And they're using the language of yin and yang, that the yin world is ending. This is the kebyuk idea, and a yang world is emerging. And in this new world, here's what they predict. And they still exist, by the way. They run a bunch of little summer school programs for children to learn Confucian ethics, right? And they said that the Korean language will be used internationally, and Korean traditional culture will become the culture of all peoples. They predicted K-pop. Okay. And then it says, Korea will teach other religions as a leading nation, as the central state. Wasn't China Chongguk? as the parent state. Okay. So here again we see, and it is a religion, it's a Confucian religion, but it's really putting Korea in the center. And then, let's see, oops, yeah. Oh, there they are. So you move Korea, you see what the trigrams are for Korea. Okay, there it is. Okay. Yeah, there's. It'd be nice if everybody speaks Korean automatically. I spent a lot of time studying it. And hopefully it'll be standard language instead of the Chodo no Satsuris I speak. Okay. Won Buddhism, what are they doing in here? Won Buddhism is not nearly as overtly nationalistic as many other new religions. But it actually, in a sense, it is quietly. Won Buddhist, unlike Shundokyo, has missionaries. They're all over the world. There's a group of Won Buddhists in Vancouver. They have a graduate school outside of Philadelphia, the U.S. Okay? And Park Chung-bin said that, he's the founder, called Sotae-san, the founder of Won Buddhism, said, Korea will be the leader of all countries in the world as far as morality is concerned. Okay, okay, let's go to. Okay, and he said the country is like a fish that is transforming into a dragon. Is what he said. Okay, and again he said in the near future, people all over the world will translate the scriptures, the Won Buddhist scriptures written in Korean, into their languages. And that's happening, by the way. I have an English language translation of the scriptures. And we'll spread the teachings around the globe. But he said it may take 4 or 5 centuries for Won Buddhism to be accepted globally. But again, in the meantime, they're promoting harmony among religions. They have an office at the United Nations, by the way, as an authorized NGO. So they have international presence. Okay. Then we get, let's see. Okay, so there is Won Buddhism. They teach, by the way, Won Buddhism and acupuncture and traditional medicine at the Won Buddhist Graduate Institute outside of Philadelphia. And probably the best known outside of Korea of the new religions is the Unification Church, or Family Federation for World Peace and Unity. And of course, they believe that Jesus failed in his mission because he's supposed to get married and have children. So God decided to send somebody else down 2,000 years later. And God chose, first they said a nation in the east, and later they said, oh, it's Korea. And then they said, oh, it's Mun Samyang. So he is the new Messiah. So Korea becomes the Holy Land. I don't know if they still do it. Many years ago when I met Unification Church followers from all over the world, they're all learning Korean language because it's a sacred language, they told me. And he's the Lord of the Second Advent. And they said, eventually all people will speak the language of the true parents. They call Reverend Mun and his wife the true parents of mankind. And of course you're going to speak your parents' language, right? So every human being is going to learn Korean. All of humanity will become one people and use one language, establishing one global nation under God. Now, of course, Mun, I can't say he died because they don't say that in Unification Church. He ascended to heaven in 2002, but his widow continues to lead the church, and she's declared something called Chun Il-guk. You know, you're all citizens of Chun Il-guk, according to her, anyway. How do they translate that? A nation of cosmic peace and unity. Did I put that on there? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So even though Moon spent most of his later life in the U.S., Korea is still the headquarters. And his widow, and now, well, the Unification Church is splitting, but she's got headquarters. I thought it was I put in my written paper, Cheongpyeong, not told Kapyeong. I'm not a geography PhD. I went there once, but I was driven there. I don't know where I went. It's a huge palace where she lives. It's that massive. Yeah, because she's the empress of the universe. But Korea's the center. That's the point. Okay, Korea's the center. And then we get into Dol Hashem Nikah. Oh, there's that's one of their headquarters. Again, world headquarters for the Chunilguk, right? The global headquarters. Okay. There are a lot of Chongsang religions, although the number is shrinking. But there are two main ones: Taisen Chilihui and Chongsang-do. They don't like each other, and they worship the same God. But Kang Jung-san, who ascended to heaven in 1909. I kind of like that. He's from Cholado. I'm a Cholado person. I like that. God's from Cholado. He supposedly came down from heaven to temporarily reverse the worsening condition of humanity and usher in what? Kabyuk. Okay? And Kabyuk will begin here in Korea, right? And what's interesting, he uses the terminology, Old Chinese idea of the Ohang, what do we call it, 5 agents, 5 forces, that the world we live in now is Sangguk, constant competition, but Kang Jung-san is bringing us into a world of Sangseng. You may have heard of Sangseng Publishing. That's Jung-sang-do's publishing company. That means we all support each other. But again, that begins with Korea. And now Taisen Chilihui does say Korea is destined to become the ruling state in the world, the center of all civilization. Okay. Oops. Okay. They don't proselytize so much outside of Korea, Taisen Chilihui. They translated their scriptures into at least English, I think other languages as well. They're working on it. But Jungsang-do is much more aggressive in their proselytizing and in their overseas work. And they say, I found this interesting, when Korea becomes the leading nation in the world, which is soon, Koreans will naturally be taller than anybody else in the world. Now, Koreans are growing in the South anyway, but still, that's what they say. And in the future, again, all the people in the world will learn to write in Korean. Again, why did I spend so much time studying? All I had to do was wait for Kabyuk. And they will come to Korea to study the language of Korea, which is happening, right? It's happening. Why will they do that, according to Jungsang-do? Because Korea is the nation that saves all the people in the world. That's what they say. So it's only appropriate, by the way, they say that Korea will lead the world in the future, because they argue, which we don't hear in Taisen Chilihui, that Korea created the world's first civilization 10,000 years ago. It's called Hwanguk, and all civilizations came out of Hwanguk, which is located not on the peninsula, but north of it. They have maps. So Korea was once the center of world civilization and will be again. Okay, and then very quickly, I got to finish up here, I think, don't I? Okay, get this thing to. Okay, there we go. Oh, and it was 9,200. I said 10,000 years. I exaggerated. 9,200 years ago, that the Hwanguk civilization arose. Okay. Here's what it looks like, and the maps they provide in their books. Yeah. And these are all, the Hwan Indus, Hwan Judea. They all offshoots of the Hwanguk, which is Korean, right? Okay. Okay. Now, I'll finish with Don World. Many years ago, I was a participant observer of Don World. That's how I've been able to teach till I was 80 to get a lot of good energy. They will deny this, but they are definitely an offshoot of Taejongkyo. That's clear. Taejongkyo, of course, is the religion that worships a Korean god, right? Tangun. And they're not they don't proselytize non-Koreans in Taejongkyo. Don World does. Although Don World says, they say, Cheongyo anin Cheongyo. A religion that's not a religion. People forget, by the way, how much influence Taejongkyo has had on modern Korea. Why do we celebrate October 3rd? National Foundation Day. That's Taejongkyo's idea. And people know in the 1950s, Koreans dated things according to Tangi. The date from Tangun's birth. Okay, that was because An Ho-sang, the first Minister of Education, was a Taejongkyo leader, actually, at one point. Okay. Again, Don World claims they claim they register as a NGO for health and wellness, but they have an associated in America religion called Tao Fellowship, which register as religion. They claim that they're teaching to the world ancient techniques of, immortality or great longevity. They call it Tanjan Hope. Now they call it brain respiration. It's the same exercises. They claim these are works, the practices originated by Tangun. Of course, these are Chinese. This is Chinese Taoism, the Tanjun Ho. The language, all the terminology they use is Sino-Korean. That tells me it's Chinese, right? And they also claim, they tried to promote Tangun's philosophy of Hongik Engan. There's a huge statue of Tangun in Sedona, Arizona, where Don World has a meditation center and retreat center. By the way, Koreans all know Hongik Engan, right? Tangun's words, right? Think of the grammar. That's Chinese grammar. Korean would be Engan ol Hongik, right? So Tangun spoke Chinese, but anyway. They've moved beyond Tangun, though. They've moved to a belief in Mago. Let's see. Oops. Oh, I'm going back the wrong way. Okay. That's stuck. Okay. Oh, okay. 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 So we got that there. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, Don World respects the three great classics of Daejongjo. When I was, in the 1990s, Don World was quite small when I was studying them, and we had to chant the Chunbugyeong, which is a nonsense text, but they claim is authored by Tangun. And it has the secrets of the universe in it, and 81 Chinese characters. But Mago, if I hear of Mago, Mago is the goddess of the earth. Supposedly, she had a paradise where everyone, all human beings lived in the Mago's castle, and they're all doing fine until some of them got bored and went out and grabbed some grapes. And eating grapes, they were thrown out of the paradise. Where'd they get that idea of eating a forbidden fruit? I don't know where they got that idea. But anyway, Mago's paradise was not on the Korean Peninsula, but they often see it as the origins of Korean civilization, that people moved south. Don World tried to erect a major statue of Mago, really high, like 33 meters high or something, in Sedona, Arizona, but they violated local zoning laws and had to tear it down. So Don World doesn't call itself a traditional religion, like Daejongjo says they're the revival of Korea's traditional religion. Don World says it's traditional Korean practices. And they want the world to learn from Korea how to live a healthier life. Okay? And they are all over the place. Okay? Okay. Oh, they have their own university, University of Brain Education. That's their name of it. I can't make that stuff up. Okay. And they go there and they have a center for the study of Korean, for Korean studies, where they study Tangun, of course, and also the Chunbukyeong. You got to study Chunbukyeong. How do you translate Chunbukyeong? Celestial Omelette Sutra? I don't know. Anyway. And they claim they're reviving the ancient tradition of Sundo, which not sun for Buddhist meditation, but sun for immortality. I have an article coming out, 1 minute, okay? Article coming, it may have came out already on imagined traditions, when I dismantle the whole idea of Sundo. So in conclusion, okay. So what is religious nationalism? Okay, we have different kinds. You have some that say, oops, you can't read that, can you? Oh, what happened there? Oh. It looked fine on my computer screen. Sorry about that. There's a way to... Okay. Anyway, some religions claim God is Korean, or Messiah is Korean, like Unification Church and Daejongjo. Others claim that there are people in Korea with unusual insights who can help humanity. But they all claim that Korea... There we go, okay. That Korea has a special role to play in humanity's future. And all humanity can learn from Korea, okay? This reminds me a little bit, I'm an historian. 19th century, the attitude popular in East Asia was, Western technology, yes, but we have to combine it with Eastern morality, right? Similar idea. The West maybe had technology, but we have the superior moral principles that the West is going to learn from. I'll finish with this. First of all, Korea is not unique in creating nationalistic new religions. As the world, globalization of the world has an homogenizing impact like nobody here is wearing hanbok today, right? Right? And so what you want to do is maintain your distinctive identity in the midst of that globalization. One way you do that is you protect your traditional beliefs and values, or look like traditional beliefs and values, within the protective covering of religion. And so you create a religion that says Korea is valuable. It's more valuable. It's got more to offer now than the world ever realized before. And we will soon be the spiritual capital of humanity. So that's why I call them, they're real religions, but they're also nationalistic. They're religious expressions of nationalism, but they're also religious. Thank you.
So I'm Lior Sarfati from Tel Aviv University. And today we'll talk about the evolving representation of Mudang in Korean television. And this is a very old image. And we'll go from the old to the new ones a little bit. So I'll cover more or less 4 topics. One of them would be tradition. So the tradition itself, a few words. We're in Korean. I guess most of you should know what it is, but I'll say a few words about that. And then I'll talk about the popular narratives. So what are the stories? Because when we go to television, we start by a story, by a folk narrative, especially if we talk about Mudang in television, right? And so I'll mention a few stories and talk about how they evolved in television. Then I'll talk about the changes. So television has been around since, what, the 60s, more or less? And I'll talk a little bit about the different periods. And I'll focus mainly on contemporary television because we see a boom of Mudang on contemporary television, which we haven't seen 15 years ago. So a lot of my talk would be on contemporary. And I'll talk about genres, how different genres, how different kinds of television program do different things to the image. So basically, I'm not going to be theorizing a lot, but we were talking about agency, about how television works with public image, how television is created and being created by public image. And then all these 3 issues will be part of these agencies. So the tradition itself, the Manchin have agency, the Mudang themselves have agency in the story, the narratives have agency. We'll see that some narratives have stronger effect on television than others. So they are being emphasized. And not all narratives can have the same agency on audiences of television programs. And then we'll talk about the changes, of course, kind of agency and the genres. Each television genre brings different powers to the story, brings different agencies, different ways to affect audiences. It's not a research about the audiences that presentation, it's more about the images themselves, because we have 15 to 20 minutes. So the tradition. So Mudang in Korea, they exist. They exist widely. I barely know a person that, if not for themselves, then somebody in their family has visited the Manchin. Might be for fun and Solal or something to get New Year's prediction. Might be more serious. But most of you have known them. I mean, we're in Korea. I don't think it surprises anybody. The term busok is kind of problematic, I have to mention, because some people don't like it being used. It's a term that started kind of with Japanese ethnographers, but we've been using it, and Korean scholarship has used it. Some people talk about mugyo, which maybe is more in discourse with the all kind of gyo, the old chondokyo and all that. But that would be religion, and many people are reluctant to see that as a kind of religion. In English, we solve it by calling it vernacular religion. So it's not institutionalized, it's not a kyo, if it's vernacular. So I don't use mugyo so much. Mudang, the people themselves, there's a lot of discussion about the hanja. And the terminology has been used for the past 100 years at least. Some people call it shamanism, I have to say that. Im Sok-jae, one of the early scholars of shamanism, kind of tried to distinguish Korean busok from shamanism. So if you're interested, you can go into that. But these are different agencies of scholars. Today we're talking about television. Last thing, the organization, one of the biggest organizations of shaman. Not all Mudang are registered, but they have like 300,000 people registered. So that's just for the people that are saying it's vanishing. Now this number is old. Actually, they said 300,000 also 20 years ago. I think that contemporary younger Mudang just don't register as much as the old generation. And the organization was called the Organization to Combat Communism at the time. So it had kind of political implication, the nationalistic implication. Now, probably there are many young Mudang that wouldn't register there. Okay, so moving to then, one last thing I wanted to say is about the agency of these people. So the organization and the Manchin themselves serve as consultant to television program. So several Manchin that I know have been consulting television program producers and writers. They've been supervising. Some of them were called actually to monitor kind of Musok scene or Mudang Kut scenes to say if they think it's right or wrong. Of course, the Manchin themselves debate the scenes. I've been watching parts of dramas with Mudang, and they have a lot to say how much it's real and not. We'll not talk today about Pamyo, about the Exhuma, the film, but the same there. There were some Mudang consulting. Netflix has consulted the Manchin for the recent production that they have on Netflix. So the Mudang have agency in how they're being represented. Actually, I'm not sure that when they are showing a Christian church, they would go to ask a priest if it's represented correctly. Because in some ways, many producers would think that they know how to represent a Christian church, which might be wrong, right? But most of the Manchin I know, when they talk about several productions, they know who are the consultants. Sometimes they're in the credits, sometimes they're not. So there is agency there. And there have been some Manchin also featuring in the television production, not as the main protagonist, but sometimes they would be in the background. And if we don't know the person, sometimes I watch television, I know that's Manchin, I've seen her. She's a Manchin, but she's just playing the drum. But she's there to supervise. So they have agency, not everybody knows that, but they feel quite empowered by that. Definitely the famous ones that have been working as consultants. It's not to say that television depictions of Musok are accurate. I mean, a Mudang can come and say, no, I don't want this to be shown, and the producer would say, or the director would say, it has to be shown, and everybody knows it's fantasy. But it's not disconnected. So when we see a fantastic scene of Mudang, most of them have had some previous knowledge, and it's not pure fantasy. Sometimes I'm surprised at how accurate they are. And then they have all the elements, fantasy, black smoke, things that you don't see in real rituals, right? So it's kind of interesting how the agency of the directors, writers who want to see fantasy, who want viewership, who are fighting for the rating, so what they are willing to put in, what the Manchin are willing to put. And I've heard some stories from people who, usually they don't want to identify or being quoted, the Manchin that have been consultant when they're upset, especially when they're not happy with the product, especially when the editing. They can supervise a ritual, but then when they edit and they cut it and they paste it in the way they want, it can be very disrupting, and then they don't want their names in the credits. So it's kind of complicated. That's one of the agencies that should be remembered. The people are not, Manchin are not weak anyway. Usually they're very strong people and character, but they're not that passive in the industry of television representation of them. Now the narrative, popular narratives are very strong in every cultural production system. And in Korea, the narratives of Busok are so intriguing. So of course, it's very nice to put them on television show Healing. There's a lot of healing. Samshin is the triad god there in the painting that I've used in my book. And unfortunately, in most television programs, the healing aspect is not the strongest one to appear on television. And why is that? It's hard to tell, but the shaman, the Mudang themselves, usually they say that they think the producers are afraid that viewers will see it as a confrontation with modern medicine. Because I was wondering, there is few stories that focus on the healing in the K-dramas, for example. But there are much more stories appeasing angry spirits. So that's much more interesting to show an angry spirit. She's burning the house, she's killing people. It's a spirit of somebody who was wrongly killed wrongly, or the people who killed the person did not get punished, or it's a young person who doesn't have offspring to have ancestral worship. These are all popular narratives that have been in Musok. We have records of them more than 1,000 years ago. Angry spirits. And in Korea you have this a strong, well, people say Confucian, I don't know if I agree, but to do chesa, to do chedie, to do all the rituals for the ancestors. So if somebody died and they don't have a gravesite, let's imagine people in the Korean War who died and their graves are not accounted for. If somebody was murdered and the body was never found, they won't have, any ritual. So they're angry spirits, and that's a popular narrative that keeps appearing in the K-dramas. And for many reasons, it's much more popular than the healing practice, which when you go to visit Mudankut, you'll see a lot of kinds of healings being done. Maybe more than appeasing angry spirit. In some ways, the appeasing of angry spirit is done for healing. So there's an angry spirit that has to be appeased so healing can occur. But this aspect is not so emphasized in the K-drama that we see, especially recently. And then, of course, spirits, they don't want to go. Very popular in K-drama. The spirits who linger around and they don't want to go to the afterworld because they have some revenge, because they don't know the pet, because all kind of reasons. And then the Mudang can help them go to the underpatch. He'll talk with the 10 messengers of hell, and that would be, so that's a very popular theme in Korean television, especially contemporary. So when we see supernatural mythology coming into the story, sometimes Shinbyong, I'll talk about genres. Some genres do talk about healing in Shinbyong. These are very old narratives. So when we talk about continuity of tradition and changes and adaptations of tradition to contemporary world, television is a very strong agent in that. If we wouldn't see these stories on television, they might disappear because families don't discuss them as often as they used to. But we see them so commonly shown on television that it's becoming a part of the Korean discourse and definitely the global discourse. Because my students now who watch Netflix know about Musok so much more than I did in the early 2000s when I started. I mean, they've seen Mudankut, they've seen, consultation, private consultation, chom, things that I saw first after knowing the Mudang for a long time. They can see that. So I think it's also helping the globalization of Korea. Maybe that's the beginning of the control that the world is going to become under Korean Mudang and not new religion. Who knows? With Netflix and Apple TV. So appeasing angry spirits appears in many, many television programs. But when we saw it in the 70s, which we'll talk about the kind of outline of the changes, we could see on some Korean television program appeasing angry spirit. It was mainly very scary. The Mudang were usually kind of a suspicious character. You could see it in film and television from the 70s. They were kind of mean, but they were appeasing the spirits, but usually they were also working with the spirits to do something bad to the people. That was 70s. Let's move forward to 2020 and on. For example, this one, great shaman. She is a nice high school student, but there are people that come, spirits, ex-people that come to ask for her help. So that student, for example, people who kill themselves, all kind of school bullying, all kind of taboo topics that come up. And she solved them, but she's not scary. And she's young and cool, and she has a male helper, who is also very handsome and cool and kind of K-pop star thing. So the image of the Mudang that can help appease the spirit has changed immensely. Sometimes you'll see an old Mudang in the background. Nowadays, she wouldn't be the main protagonist. She might be an old Mudang, she might be a fake Mudang, she may be a person that wants to harm people. But the main Mudang protagonist would be usually young and cute. I just recently bumped into a new production, again, high schooler, Mudang, cute, her boyfriend is cute, helping people. Even in historic dramas, I just watched that on my way in Korean Air. I saw the first episode, it was intriguing. It's a historical drama. In the past, I discussed in my book historical dramas as where the Manshin is very unrealistic, doing very strange things, and doesn't look at all like contemporary Mudang. That was my impression in the early 2000 historical dramas like Chumong, Moon Embracing, this all kind of early 2000 drama. The Mudang did not look like contemporary Mudang, did not behave like them. But this one, I saw the first episode and I really want to watch the rest. So her mother, the girl is a Mudang, she's destined Mudang. Anyway, she's an optometrist in the Joseon dynasty, one of the first in Korea, like very a fashionable professional woman, but she's also a Mudang. But the first episode that struck me is that we can see her mother, I think, talking to her about the spirit and how she should be aware of the spirit. But when they show the Mudang house, first of all, they show the flag with the red and white, which historically we don't think it was the way that shaman house were marked, like 200 years ago. So that's the contemporary manner. And the Mudang shrine inside looks like many that I've seen. And usually in historical dramas that I'm not discussing today, it didn't look like that. So it's kind of funny that they're taking this anachronistic tour of contemporary Musok, teaching the audiences how it looks, although probably 200 years ago, I don't know if it looked like in other historical dramas, but this is very close to reality. I was very surprised. Later on, she has the black smoke, she has the mean spirit, and it becomes completely fantasy. But I was shocked that by minute 1, what we see is a Mudang shrine that looks like contemporary Mudang shrine. It was very surprising. So this one is for me to explore in the future, maybe in my way back on Koreaunder. I'll have more time to be more. Have you seen that? It's completely new. It just came up, I think, 2 months ago. So, back to contemporary romantic dramas. Another folk narrative that we hear a lot around Mudang, and we even hear in historical text, is about the fake Mudang. So there are Mudang that just want to exploit people, take their money. So the fake Mudang is starring in contemporary K television dramas. This drama is completely about the fake Mudang. The handsome guy is actually a police detective who is faking to be a Mudang so that people believe what he finds with technological means. So he has the young woman is a hacker, and she hacks into all kinds of cameras, and they find out criminals. But the way to convince the police officer and the people that it's true is saying that he's a Mudang, and that the spirits told him that this is the killer or something like that. It's kind of weird. The opposite, of course, he becomes, it's a teaser, close if you want to, he becomes a true believer in Musok tradition in the end. So fake shamanism is brought into the center of television. I've seen it at least in 4 dramas, contemporary dramas. There is a fake Mudang, there is a real Mudang. And then the audience get to learn that maybe there are fake Mudang, like everybody's told them, it was in the village talk, but there is also real Mudang. So that brings us to the evolving image. So in the 70s, we don't see them much on television. In the 80s, there were documentaries. People were shown to kind of be, Minjok Munhwa, preserving the tradition, something else. Early 2000, it was still kind of sad. They were not in the center. And suddenly, in the last 5 years, I would say, they are the center of the drama. There are people with emotions, with everything. So television can teach the audience a lot about Musok and Mudang. I'll skip that. That's about the documentary. And I think we can learn from different genres, different things. We can learn about the cognitive aspect. What do they think? What are the stories? What is the history, the knowledge behind? How do they feel? I've known Mudang for many years. The thing the television programs show about feeling of the Mudang, I would be kind of cautious to ask them. But in television, you can see how the spirit enters their body and come out of their body and what they feel, and you hear their thoughts because you can hear them, in K-drama. It's very personal, I would say, the way the television teach people. If it's true or false, that's another question, but many audience, we know, believe in what they see on television. And about behavior. So usually, what do they do? We see it in documentaries, which nowadays are like reality shows. We can see how they feel in romantic drama, their difficult love life. Also in reality show, I'll show one in a bit, they talk about it. And how can they help us? We can learn that Mudang can actually help. So I'll go briefly on all the genres because each genre has a lot of stuff to say about. All kind of reality shows. This was a 24 camera, walking along the Mudang, doing with them everything they do. I won't show the video, but you can see in Heaven's Face, it's 236 chapters. It's the whole Shin Byung story, but that's the old style, 2004. It's only for people in the morning, older people, housewives. Here you can see the spirit coming in and out from the body of the Manshin and how she feels about it. She's not a real Manshin, but anyway, she gets possessed. This one is really nice because you can meet Mudang in reality show. They're looking for a love life. So they bring all the Mudang, but also Saju, all kind of diviners into one house. They have to find partners, but they tell their story, how they become shaman, why it's difficult for them in their love life. So that's the most penetrating kind of personal encounter that people can watch. And webtoons, well, that's another exploration. I just had to show it. It goes along with all the same thing. It's the new genre. It's not television, but Mudang are very plentiful on webtoons. And some programs show, for example, this is a crime-solving program, The Exorcist. So there's an unexplored death, and they can help. The Mudang can get the spirit of the dead person and say who killed them, did they commit suicide, whatever. It had a lot of It was in 2008 now, and then again, and now there's a new episode coming. I think it's 9 or 8 season. Here you can sell your house if there is a haunted house. If spirits are haunting him, there is a mudang that helps you free the house from the spirit and you sell it. She's a contemporary mudang. She's never dressed like a mudang, but she behaves exactly like a mudang. Her mother was a mudang. So my conclusion. So I think television producers want to captivate the audience, they want rating, but the fact that Korean and international audiences are so interested is telling about the mainstreaming of Busok through television. I think that the Manchin are given a platform. They're shown, most Manchin that I talk to, they're happy about these television shows because they say people come to me. They wouldn't come if they wouldn't know I exist, you know? It kind of broadens the knowledge. And most people don't really think that Mudang can harm them as much as they're shown to harm people in some dramas. And then they can learn what to do with them, how they can help. And I think that if in the past, like in the 70s, the Shin Maolundon and all the, did I say it right? Semaul Lundang. And all these movements were against this superstitious religion. I think now in Korea, especially the younger people, they're not really worried about it. I mean, Korea is a global power. Who cares, you know? And we can do this stuff, and that's fun, and it's beautiful. So let's go on television, you know, have that for us. Thank you.
So, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. Still trying to figure out why I was invited. I'm a psychologist by training, and that's really all I know. But I'm going to pretend to know something about contemporary Korea, so please forgive me if I say something that is just completely bonkers. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to go straight ahead and read my paper, if that's okay. All right. So there is growing fear of the end of liberal democracy today. Authoritarianism has been rearing its ugly head again. World leaders in both advanced and less advanced democracies are finding ways to bend the law to their will and surreptitiously, and sometimes not so surreptitiously, crush dissent. One notable example of a failed attempt at challenging the core values of liberal democracy would be the series of events that unfolded recently in and near South Korea's National Assembly building and the National Election Commission's offices on the 3rd of December, 2024. Other equally noteworthy examples would be the January 6, 2021 United States Capitol attack and the January 8, 2023 Presidential Palace and Supreme Court attack in Brasilia. These events are particularly noteworthy because of what they potentially imply for the future of politics and value creation in countries that are still struggling to crawl out of the shadows or old shadows of authoritarianism like South Korea. If the US example shows us anything, it would be that a failure to push a stake through the heart of liberal democracy is, under the right, or shall I say, wrong circumstances, not a failure at all. In fact, it may just be a prelude to something more momentous and impactful, the irrevocable metamorphoses of liberal democracy, perhaps. But under what circumstances, we may ask, can a violent clash in the Capitol turn into a pivotal moment of value creation? Could the storming of the Seoul Western District Court in Seoul on January 19th, earlier this year, take on a new life and signal the reshaping of politics and political identities in South Korea? To answer these questions, we must first turn to what these events have in common: a violent desacralization that followed the humiliation of the king. The old adage that Americans serve no king notwithstanding, the American presidency and its sister, the Korean presidency, both continue to demonstrate recently, with great panache, I might add, the enduring allure and presence of what the medieval historian Ernst Kantorowicz called the king's two bodies. There is, to borrow the wording of the English crown jurist active during Queen Elizabeth's age, the king in the flesh who possesses a body natural that dies and can be humiliated or killed. There is, however, a second body to which the king is bound. This body, the body politic, transcends the flesh and exerts control and influence over a larger political community. Behind the claims concerning the authority and sanctity of the office of the presidency advanced with greater frequency these days in South Korea, consider, for instance, Yoon Suk-yeol's defense of martial law as an act requiring a high degree of political discretion, 고도의 정치적 판단, and an act of governance that is not subject to judicial review, 사법심사의 대상이 되지 않는 통치 행위, and special investigator's office tendency, very common tendency, to invoke the notion of an investigation without sanctuary. 성역 없는 수사. We find, indeed, echoes of the political mythology documented by Kantorowicz. Like the kings of yore, presidents are both humans and symbols, that is to say, both body natural and body politic. Their seemingly transcendent authority emerges from the uncomfortable space between natural charisma and legal fiction. If we're to trust the controversial political theorist Carl Schmitt, this kind of authority, still operative and relevant in the modern world, has theological roots. On this, Schmitt and Kantorowicz were in agreement. But Schmitt also claims that the sovereign is therefore he who decides the exceptions, and the exception in jurisprudence is analogous to the miracle in theology. As Victoria Kahn points out in her study of political theology, Schmitt advanced these claims to offer a possible solution to the serious problems that he thought his own Weimar Republic faced, namely widespread liberal thinking and the proliferation of exceptions. This, Schmitt surmised, made critical decision-making quite difficult, especially in moments of exception. But he believed that the Catholic notion of authority and legitimacy, for instance, the church's corpus mysticum, or mystical body of Christ, does not neatly separate the concrete person, namely Christ, and charisma from his or her office and position, and therefore offers a viable alternative to the Republican model of representation as delegation. Wouldn't Trump love this idea? Naturally, sovereign authority for Schmitt was and had to ultimately be a personal, charismatic authority. This was not something that the modern nation state or even the throne imagined as a kind of corporation, institution, or abstract seat of authority and power could effectively wield. A staunch anti-authoritarian, Kantorowicz saw differently. Modernity enabled the people to replace the king and their institutions to bear the burden of the body politic. The power of the modern state, as Isaac Ariel Reed points out, is defined precisely by the separation of the person from his or her rights and duties, which is sealed to the body politic and not to the cult of his or her personality and charisma. And this separation is made possible by the power of imagination, fiction, myth, and of course, why we're here, religion. It is this separation that allows power and authority to survive the death or corruption of the body natural and endure through time. This in turn enables free individuals incorporated into a political community to exist as a community bound to a common body politic in perpetuity. Duties, obligations, and executive orders appear to be less arbitrary, in other words, done in response to emergency or whim, like what happened in last December, and more necessary and palpable as a consequence. What happens, however, if the king's second body, the body politic, comes under threat? Needless to say, a crisis ensues, and this crisis, Reed claims, has everything to do with the failure of imagination. If we were to give the crisis that we all face today a name, it would have to be, to once again borrow Reed's wording, a crisis of liberal modernity. René Girard, I'm sure a familiar name here, gave this a different and perhaps more illuminating name, the sacrificial crisis. This, as Girard points out, is a crisis of distinctions, or more specifically, distinctions between individuals and institutions, that is, charisma and delegation. The dissolution of such distinctions, as Mary Douglas has shown, results in ritual impurity. And this, in turn, precipitates a crisis by allowing the impurity of violence to contaminate the cultural order and push us once again into the never-ending spiral of reciprocal violence. An eye for an eye, a son for a son, spilt blood requiring even more blood in return, like Korean politics, right? In fact, it was, Gerard claims, our attempt to contain this reciprocal violence that led to the birth of the many institutions that excelled at creating the illusion of unanimity and its corollary, surrogate victims. For example, the Jews in Nazi Germany, labor activists under developmentalist modernity, runaway spending advocated by uncooperative socialists, or climate migrants and single mothers on welfare, and so on and so forth, right? The exceptions continue. Our institutions thus conceal a generative violence, that's Gerard's term, the violence of seeming or necessary unanimity. And our refusal to recognize this generative violence at the core of our societies threatens to unleash an even greater violence. This indeed seems to explain the indiscriminate violence we witnessed at Seoul Western District Court in Seoul on January 19th. Today, the body politic is indeed under threat. The quintessential modern processes of disenchantment and differentiation have left us with a world devoid of any broadly accepted sacred canopies. With nothing to transcend political and ideological divisions and guide values as a collective, everyone is forced to police their own boundaries. Identity politics, driven by hardened and essentialized differences, rather than their shared queerness, is left to serve as the grounds for its own justification. Even the sacred, as Reed rightly claims, is just one of the many different but equal options available for identity formation and capitalist consumption. The threat of liberal thinking, as Schmidt once feared, creates and sustains a brewing sense of crisis. This, however, need not necessarily imply that liberal thinking should be erased, displaced, or suppressed. Again, what we face is a failure of imagination, not free thought. This, I believe, is most evident in the case of South Korea. Consider what has happened to the king's second body since Park Chung-hee, prompted in part by provocations from the north, disappointing election results, a large withdrawal of U.S. troops stationed in South. Really sounds like Yoon Suk-yeol, actually, and Nixon's announcement of his visit to China. Park declared a state of emergency on the 6th of December, 1971, and issued a special statement in which he clearly laid out his new vision for liberal democracy in South Korea. I quote, "Dear citizens," I'm not going to sound like Park Chung-hee, "I have faith that our liberal democratic system is far superior and more effective than communist dictatorship. In addition, I firmly believe that the best system to counter the communist system is a democratic system. However," and of course, whatever follows however, you know, right? "In light of today's state of emergency, our current peace system contains not a few vulnerabilities," a euphemism, right? "If democracy is the most precious thing to us, then what should we do when someone who wishes to steal or destroy this precious thing appears before us? The guns and swords of invaders cannot be stopped with the slogans of freedom and peace. To protect this, appropriate sacrifices and prices must be paid. 희생이죠, right? If necessary, we must have the firm resolve to suspend even some of the freedoms we enjoy and deal with it." So we're sacrificing freedom, right? "It goes without saying that the call to suspend or limit individual liberties in whatever shape or form in a liberal democracy is, to put it mildly, controversial. This is especially true when the call is issued by none other than the president himself. Aware of this, I think, Park establishes the legitimacy of his decision this way, I quote, "Among the official responsibilities, 직책, of the president, what must take priority above all else is the safeguarding of national security. This responsibility, 책임, cannot be delegated or transferred to anyone else. Therefore, the assessment of national security risk is a duty that has been granted entirely and solely only to me. 전적으로 나에게 주어진 의무. In addition, the responsibility to seek measures, 조치, at the appropriate moment based on risk assessment is also my primary responsibility concerning national security." End quote. It behooves us to recognize Park's closing statement here as a speech act with illocutionary force. First, we should note that Park doesn't hold the office of the president. There can be no delegate. In this speech act, Park and the Korean presidency are one and the same.
We should also note that the Speech Act performs what it purports to explain. Park's goal is not necessarily to persuade anyone that he and he alone has the power to make national security risk assessments and devise emergency measures, but to simply make it so. That's what a Speech Act does. This the Speech Act effectively does, but not because the conditions are felicitous. The Speech Act is effective because it does away with the need for collective representation in the form of a sacred symbol. The president acts and can act in response to emergency or whim. Under the new Russian regime, the sacred institution was no more. There was now only a strong-willed king with just one body, a charismatic individual who got what he wanted through brute force, fear, and coercion, something that unfortunately is becoming far too common these days. The conditions for Park's Speech Act, in other words, were forcibly made felicitous. The assassination of Park in 1979 unequivocally demonstrates the frailty and ineffectiveness of his strategy, a strategy that pitted individual liberties and laborers' rights, which had to be sacrificed, against modernization and nationalism. Although it is true that Park's developmentalist legacy and cult of personality will weigh heavily on future South Korean politics, the power, authority, and sanctity, if any, of the presidency, as Park himself fashioned it, could not survive his untimely death. Park was the Korean presidency, and the presidency was Park. The king was dead, and it no longer made any sense to say, "Long live the king." Moreover, in Korea, there was now only bare life. That is, people turned into the objects of the state's calculating instrumentalist knowledge and power. Park's death thus precipitated a crisis of political mythology in South Korea. So, the choice was clear. Koreans could either look for a new body politic, a new figuration of the sacred, or once again resort to the strategy of violence and creation of what Schmidt and more recently Giorgio Agamben called a permanent state of exception. It's not a good thing. To the great dismay of many, Chun Doo-hwan's Fifth Republic chose the latter, and not surprisingly, failed to establish a meaningful, nonviolent, symbolic way of exercising power and authority that could endure through time. This inherent failure was laid bare for all to see in the June democracy movement of 1987. Not coincidentally, it's under these curious circumstances that we find more frequent references to the uncomfortable mixture of religion and politics in Korea, especially in connection with politicians who align themselves with the conservative cause. Pro-labor candidates and presidents, in contrast, seem to have seen no apparent need to mix the two, as their role was now defined largely by the divisive logic of regionalism and deeply entrenched partisan politics, symptoms of a crisis of liberal modernity. In fact, this is also true for their conservative counterparts. But the lingering shadow of Park Chung-hee continues to place ambitious conservative politicians, who tend to be in jail, right, in a uniquely tight mold. There was virtually no way of avoiding a comparison with Park and his legacy. Naturally, under political duress, conservative politicians in Korea, rather than avoid Park's example, often choose to follow it instead and consolidate their base with the slogans of national security and economic prosperity, something that I'm sure you all are very familiar with. But more was clearly needed to eventually step out of the shadow of Park's cult of personality, and this is really where I wanted to get to today. For that to happen, the body politic had to be reimagined. This was done, as Judy Han points out, by reducing the body politic to intimate public spheres or making intimate publics take the place of the dominant general world. Lee Myung-bak's choice, for instance, was to strengthen his ties with the Presbyterian Sommang Church in Sinsadong and make the intimate connections forged through private faith rather than the abstract notions of civic duty and the public good, not to mention gender and class, the defining feature of responsible citizenship and leadership. In 2004, at an event organized by the Holy City Movement, Lee, while serving as the mayor of Seoul, once explained the legitimacy of his calling this way: "I declare that the city of Seoul is a holy place governed by God. The citizens in Seoul are God's people. The churches and Christians in Seoul are spiritual guards that protect the city. I now dedicate Seoul to the Lord." Oh, okay. An unabashed supporter of the church, Lee faithfully portrays himself and fellow Christians as humble servants of God, doing God's good work. Attempts to imagine a body politic are thus made with the help of an affective call to theology, but this, we should note, is a theology that is heavily inflected by the Korean evangelical gospel of prosperity. It is, of course, impossible to be certain about Lee's true intentions. We could easily regard Lee as a disingenuous politician using religion for political gain. After all, with the assistance of the influential megachurches in Korea and controversial pastors like Chun Kwang-hun, Lee was able to mobilize massive Christian support for a successful presidential campaign. But Lee's continued personal engagement with the church at various levels, long after he retired from politics, seems to imply otherwise. Almost done. Lee's attempt to realize charismatic power and authority through the medium of an intimate public, I believe, makes more sense when set against a larger backdrop of the mixture of religion, or the prosperity gospel of evangelicals to be more precise, and politics, the private and the public, that continues to define conservative politics in Korea today. Consider, yet again, Chun Kwang-hun's efforts, made in the name of God and country, to derail Moon Jae-in's presidential campaign, his active involvement in pro-Yoon protests during the impeachment trial, and his connections to the violent storming of the Seoul Western District Court on January 19. Private and public realms were able to mix in far less conspicuous ways as well, until it was exposed by the protests at Ewha Women's University and the candlelight protests in Gwanghwamun Square. Park Geun-hye's relationship with Choi Tae-min and his now infamous daughter Choi Sun-sil and granddaughter Jung Yura remained largely hidden from the public. This, however, makes the relationship no less important in understanding the lingering attraction of intimate publics in Korea today. Just as the Korean evangelical gospel of prosperity brought Christian intimate publics together as one in Korea, Park Geun-hye's ties to the Choes provided the collusion between politics and wealth, or more specifically, the presidency and the chaebol system, with a sense of intimacy, or shall I say, the occult, which proved to be critical in sustaining an elitist culture that justified the enrichment of the haves at the expense of the have-nots. These ties also proved to be critical in the formation of social scapegoats, the legitimacy of which was palpably thin. From Yoon Suk-yeol's downfall, we may be able to learn similar lessons. The investigation of Yoon and his spouse Kim Gun-hee continues to reveal new intimate publics and scapegoats, but what we see in these attempts to legitimize authority and power is the same crisis of political mythology that troubled Lee and Park earlier. This was made all too apparent when Yoon was caught on national TV raising his left hand, marked with the character Wang or King. The character most certainly was not meant to serve as a simple symbol or signal. It was meant to function as a kind of contagious magic that could transform Yoon into a powerful thing or relic with what James Gibson once referred to as affordances, that is, with expected or perceived possibilities for intimate interaction. It was, in short, a magical means of creating an intimate public organized around not an institution, but charisma. Yoon and Kim also seem to have taken something straight out of Park's playbook. In addition to magic, what we also see in the ongoing investigation of Yoon and Kim are shady power brokers who provide backroom deals with a sense of intimacy or the occult. These are, needless to say, poor replacements for a proper body politic that can enrich the lives of everyone in the political community with meaningful, sustainable, and inspiring values. We can only hope that the impeachment of Yoon and the election of the current president, Lee Jae-myung, will prove to be the opportunities that South Korea needed to find this kind of inclusive body politic. We can only hope that the new body politic so discovered does not neglect the generative violence that necessitated its discovery and acceptance in the first place. If neglected, as we have seen time and again, I'm afraid this generative violence will rear its ugly head again and push us deeper into a Girardian sacrificial crisis or reading crisis of liberal modernity. Thank you all for your patience.
My name is Hae-young Song, and I'm also from the Department of Religious Studies at Seoul National University. I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to read the three insightful presentations, and I'd like to also kind of offer a few brief comments and questions as well. As a co-organizer, I never expected there are so many people came to here. So I have two very brief comments and questions for each presenters. As we all know, Korea has experienced more dynamic change than almost any other nation. This is evident in both politics and religion. Particularly, establishing democracy has been a long and challenging process. As you know, the declaration of the martial law and the second impeachment in this year. Religiously, Korea has witnessed a remarkable diversity of faiths alongside a growing number of non-religious people. These dynamics continue into the 21st century. Recently, politics, religion, and culture have intersected in new and complex ways. Each of your presentations captures these changes from a unique perspective. I have 3 questions for each presenters. For Dr. Baker, you have shown how nationalist new religions from Donghak to downward have constructed Korea as a sacred center. And Dr. An, you have illuminated how political myths and religious aura overlapped in Korean politics, especially since the Park Chung-hee era. And Dr. Sarpati, you have traced the evolving representations of Korean shamanism through television media. I have learned a great deal from all of your work, and I'm grateful for the perspectives you have shared. I would like to ask 3 questions for Dr. Baker. Many countries are now paying remarkable attention to Korea's politics and culture. As someone who has closely observed Korea's development for a long time, how do you interpret these transformations in connection with the insights or predictions of nationalist new religions? And for Dr. An, the fusion of political conservatism and religion seems stronger than ever before in Korea. In your view, what was the main reasons for this, and how might it shape Korean politics and religion going forward, especially within the broad context of the post-Park Chung-hee political history? Lastly, for Dr. Sarpati, you have studied Korean shamanism with remarkable depth. I'm curious, as a personal, which aspects of the fusion between shamanism and politics during the Yoon Suk-yeol administrations stand out the most to you as an expertise in Korean shamanism? And how is this phenomenon viewed internationally? Thank you very much.
Maybe I suggest, just to give plenty of chance, if there's anybody who's really keen to ask a question, maybe we can start with that. If not, we can start with Professor Song's questions. So there doesn't seem to be any immediate reaction. So we just start. Could you maybe just start with briefly answering?
How do I interpret the insights of Korean new religions? I fit it in Korean history in general. Korea has made remarkably rapid changes. I mean, I've been coming to Korea for about 50 years, and changes are incredible. And of course, Korea already had a very strong sense of a distinctive Korean cultural identity. I mean, compare Korea to Europe. How many European countries have kept their borders the way Chosun did for 5 centuries? Not many. I can think of any, actually. So I think when Korea was challenged by the West, by the power of the West, starting in the 19th century, I mean, Donghak began, Che Jae-yu is talking about what the West is doing in China. So he's reacting to this challenge, to what he believes is the center of the world's best moral principles and values. So it's not just new religions arose in response to this, but not just new religions. I know many Korean Christians believe that the center of Christianity has shifted from Holy Land to Europe to America, now to Korea. And Korean Buddhists are now very much involved in promoting Korean-style Buddhism outside of Korea. And so what I see is Koreans have responded to globalization they've always had a very strong pride in their distinctive culture, distinct from, traditionally, distinct from Japan and China. but now they want to be distinct from the whole world. And one way to do that is to emphasize that you have religious insights the world not only doesn't have, but needs to get from you. And so, I see this response to new religions as a product of an ancient Korean history of Koreans trying to maintain a distinctive culture despite pressure in traditional times from overwhelmingly larger neighbors like China.
About the fusion of shamanism and politics. First of all, I have to say that from what I observed, Christianity or certain Christian trends have been involved in Korean politics from let's say from the side, maybe not as central. For what I read in Korean media and heard from people, I don't think they were so distracted by the fact that they were maybe the politicians were consulting the Mudang, but more worried about the manners that this is manipulating the country in ways that are clandestine. So I think it goes back to the way that people were afraid of Mudang in the past. They are not controllable in any way. They don't have an institution. They say what they want. And for me, that's what mattered in Korea. You asked about internationally. When I read about it in, let's say, American and European media, people were worried about the fact that the president is consulting a Mudang, which in Korea was not that much the issue. So I think it's different in Korea and in other more maybe Christian countries. The emphasis is what's worrying them about this. But that's kind of a shallow observation.
Yeah. Again, I'm gonna have to seek your forgiveness in advance. I have incredible jet lag. It's 3 a.m. for me right now. My brain is telling me to sleep, but so I might be incoherent. But Professor Song, thank you very much for your very thoughtful comments and questions. Again, I'm not a specialist of this, so take whatever I have to say with a grain of salt. But I do really personally believe that there is a crisis of political theology in Korea today. Now, the way I use the word theology here, it's really more aligned with the way I think theorists, political scientists use it, but it's very different from the way we use the word religion when we refer to, let's say, the collusion of politics and religion. Not that there's anything wrong with the term religion itself, but just the way it's used in this particular context. So what I think is absolutely necessary for a healthy democracy to flourish is for a political theology, a very good one, at least one that can be more encompassing and inclusive, to be in place and accepted by all. But in this sense, a theology is absolutely necessary, and I think anybody who believes that secularism is going to be the second coming of Christ, third, fourth coming of Christ, or whatever, right? I'm gonna kindly have to disagree that. In a way, you can't have a politics, a really healthy politics, without some aspect of theology. Another word that I've been using for this is the symbolic, right? What we have since Park Chung-hee's time is the reduction of everything into the literal. We don't have the symbolic anymore. There isn't a larger body politic to which all Koreans today can latch onto and say, this is what makes us Korean, right? And at the same time, be as inclusive and democratic as we hope to be. Instead, since Park Chung-hee, what we have is a man who, for a variety of different reasons, and he's a complex human being. I'm not saying that he's a terrible, kind of devilish human being. He's complex. But what I'm saying is that either willingly or unwillingly, probably willingly, he reduced authority and power and the power of political theology to his body, to his person. And in effect, what we ended up was having just nothing but politics. There's no theology in this. The aftermath of this is what basically all ambitious conservative politicians are having to live, because in a way they have no choice. There is no body politic to which they can do. I mean, they of course say anti-communism, prosperity, and all that. These slogans are all nice and good, right, and politically effective, but these are very poor replacements for an actual robust body politic, which Korea was completely, totally capable of achieving, and it still is. Now, so what that means is the conservatives here are stuck in a political rut. That's how I see it. And I'm sure there are people here who agree with this because it's a very simplistic understanding of Korean politics. I do not profess to know anything really about Korean politics, but that's just my personal take on it. And as somebody who studies religion, I think that if people want to find a sustainable, long-lasting solution to the current crisis, it's not going to come from some nice dialogue between 민주당 and 국민의힘. We've tried that. We've crossed that river before, and it doesn't do any good, right? What we need is for politicians, regardless of whether they're blue or red, to really think about the political theology of democracy, right? And only this way can we properly recognize some of the very disturbing tendencies for us to create the wrong sacrifices, the wrong exceptions, and pushing people, very wrongly so, into the darkest margins of Korean society. So that's really all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this fascinating panel. I'm not a scholar of religion, but when I think about the new religions, especially, I think about Weber and disenchantment on the world. Basically, you say, no, it's not disenchantment, it's actually a lot of enchantment in this. But I was really struck by Laura's observation of television as re-enchanting the world, but also, you know, explaining too much. Like we explain the unexplainable, we see the things we are not supposed to see because, you know, we're magic, we're supposed to be hidden or something like that. So what do you think about this, you know, enchantment, disenchantment, whatever, maybe it's old-fashioned, but this television somehow takes the magic of these supposedly magical things.
It's hard to say. You know, it's kind of, what do you like? You like to expose the magic or not? I think a lot of hidden issues stay. Maybe if Korea becomes the center, like you said, I don't know. You think it's enchanting Korea, the new religion?
I would say so. And again, that enchantment is a way of protecting some part of Korean identity from the globalization, homogenizing effect is what it's all about, really. But again, that's not unique to Korea. That happens all over the world. The 19th and 20th century saw an explosion of new religions around the world, including the United States. And it's all about resisting this homogenizing effect of globalization.
My question is directed to Jun-an. Again, my name is Myung-sam, and then I enjoyed listening to your talk. And while I was listening to your I think wonderful drawing of this, you know, theoretical tradition, Girard, and also political theology and whatnot. I was thinking, are we talking about? I mean, I'm thinking about these figures like Donald Trump and Yoon Suk-yeol and other figures, and I'm thinking, are they kings of this world? I'm saying this. I'm asking this because, on the other hand, they have the bodies of like clowns. People who show up in like a professional wrestling matches and then put on, you know, shows and whatnot. And then since last week, I think I cannot shake off this image of Yoon Suk-yeol lying in his the prison cell with wearing only his underwears and then just bring out all this tantrum and whatnot. So they are acting like sometimes they're acting like babies, clowns, and then put on these kind of shows and whatnot. And then when we think about these kings, the images of kings, we probably tend to connect this image of king with the virtues of dignity or whatnot. And then come to think of it, 10 years ago, I think, come to think of it, Park Geun-hye actually faced her fate with very, kind and dignity, I think. She had her own class, in a sense, I think. But this time we are facing very different situations. And then I'm kind of, I don't know, like I'm kind of trying to push you to think about, are we talking about bodies of kings, or do we have to come up with different, I don't know, different understandings or concepts of kings or kingly figures who are also acting like clowns? But I'm saying this because in the Agambenian tradition, the sacred persons are also a cursed person, and they are tabooed figure who are kind of extraordinary in the sense that not just they are extraordinary in the sense of being sacred and then powerful, but also they are going to be beheaded and then killed, and then they are the ones who are kind of sacrificed in the later in the Girardian sense of the term. So yeah, I'm kind of asking you to, I don't know, think about this both aspects of kingly bodies. That's my maybe dumb question.
You know, it's not a dumb question. Thank you for. It's the reason why I invoke Kenterowitz's notion of the king's two bodies is really because I wanted to basically say that these people are no kings, right? In the traditional sense of the term. In the traditional sense of the term, there would be a political theology attached to the authority and power, right? And aura and the body of the king. The current Korean presidents who ended up either in jail or in their underwear, they or both, right? They can't, of course, claim to have access to the same kind of thing, and that's precisely what I'm trying to point out. In fact, what I was trying to explore is why these people couldn't really claim themselves to be kings, although clearly they imagined themselves to be, right? With these enlarged sort of senses of egos and so on and so forth, but it went really nowhere, and I find that to be really curious. And this also goes for our dear American president as well. Right? Who fashions himself to be something larger than life. But the reason why we see repeated failures and now people resorting to something more drastic, violent, and truly bizarre, right, is I think because easy access to a reputable, reliable, right, and widely accepted political theology is now gone, right? So to put it very simply, are there kings today? No. But do I think there should be something like a king for the next age or a queen or whatever we want to call them, right? I think so, because I think politics without a theology, without the symbolic dimension, without something that can help us better guide the way we create Homo sacer, and Yoon Suk-yeol definitely isn't one, although he wants to be, right? I think we're doomed. So that's, I guess, my answer to your very intelligent question.
Okay. I think time is up technically, but maybe just one quick question. Yeah. I'm not sure if we really have to keep to the second for this. It seems to get it, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'll make it quick. For Lyra, about the image, it was so interesting to see the images of mudangs from television. But I think the changes in mudang's image is kind of related to their social status in Korean society, because I think the current images of mudang is like that in romantic comedy or something, because they're not the real danger anymore, because in the 1970s people go to mudang instead of hospitals or doctors, so that became kind of a headache for the Korean government. So at that time they're real danger, but now they're kind of sanitized, kind of not very dangerous. Maybe that affects the image. I mean, how the representation of the mudang, I guess. I'm sorry. I just wanted to share this idea.
We don't have time to discuss the history of that. And I'm not sure that they were real danger in the 70s, but they were definitely framed like that in the politics of kind of modernizing Korea. But it would need more exploration to see if they really pose the danger. But I'm sure they were used like that, as antagonist, modernization.
Okay, thank you all for attending this panel. And thank you, everybody. For me, this was the easiest panel I ever took part in, so thank you very much.